Good day, grade 12s, and welcome back. We're going to be looking at a very interesting poem by Cecil Day Lewis. Now, Cecil Day Lewis was an Anglo-Irish poet who was born in Ballintubbut in Ireland. Now, he was Poet Laureate of Britain from 1968 until his death in 1972, and was a member of a group of poets at Oxford University during the 1930s. And he embraced socialist ideals. He was the son of Frank and Kathleen. Now, after the death of his mother in 1906, Cecil was brought up in London by his father. He was educated in Sherborne School and at Wadham College in Oxford. In 1928, he married Constance Mary King, who was the daughter of a Sherborne schoolmaster, and he worked as a school teacher as well. But in the 1940s, he had a very long and troubled love affair with the novelist Rosamund Lehman. As a young man, he was active in the Communist Party, and his early poetry was an expression of radical ideas. His first wife was a nature lover, and he also became one. And his later poetry, including A Hard Frost, which is what we're going to be looking at today, showed his preoccupation with the natural world. He became a successful novelist. He wrote detective stories. In 1951, he became professor of poetry at Oxford, and he had 4 children, one of whom you might know if you watch movies often enough, Daniel Day-Lewis. That's his youngest son. So his first marriage ended up in divorce in 1951, and he married actress Jill Balkan. And as I said, he died in 1972 at the age of 68. So we've mentioned his fascination with nature. So let's have a look now at the poem A Hard Frost by Cecil Day Lewis. A frost came in the night and stole my world, and left this changeling for it, a precocious image of spring, too brilliant to be true. White lilac on the window pane, each grass blade furred like a catkin, Maydrift loading the hedge. The elms behind the house are elms no longer, but blossomers in crystal, stems of the mist that hangs yet in the valley below, amorphous, as the blind tissue whence creation formed. The sun looks out, and the fields blaze with diamonds. Mockery spring, to lend this bridal gear for a few hours to a raw country maid, then leave her all disconsolate with old fairings of aconite and snowdrop. No, not here, amid this flounce and filigree of death, is the real transformation scene in progress, but deep below, where frost, worrying the stiff clods, unclenches their grip on the seed and lets the future breathe. Quite interesting. Let's have a look at this. Let's summarize that, shall we? Let's have a look at what it actually is saying. Now, this poem is describing the beautiful scene that the poet saw one day when he woke up in winter morning. The speaker describes how a freezing winter night has left icy frost crystals all over the glass, the grass, the trees, and the hedge in the garden. And the most prominent imagery used is the frost and snow, likening them to beautiful white diamonds. You can almost visualize them as they shine and reflect in the sunlight. Now, these are used to portray a beautiful scene of white snow spreading all over the forest. Now, usually the forest in winter gave people a sense of cruelty, harshness, and lifeless. Have you ever seen trees in the middle of winter? They're bare, there's no leaves, and if you are in a cold climate, you know that they get white with frost, and it looks hard and harsh. But after having a white frost coating on the dead trees, mountains, and everything seem to become glamorous and attractive. He says that this overnight transformation is actually just an illusion. And the real change is happening underground, where the hard lumps of earth are being cracked and broken by the frost. And this will eventually allow the seeds, which are held frozen throughout winter, to reach air and moisture that they need to start growing as winter warms up and moves into spring. So besides portraying the stunning scenery, the poet also wants to relate the transformation in human life cycle, which lies beneath the cold and snow. The poem deals with a change that is seen in the morning after the frost has settled overnight. And the poet highlights the beauty and the purity of the scene, and through a series of comparisons paints an evocative picture of a landscape. Much of the language used in these comparisons is archaic or unfamiliar, so the use and the note of a dictionary is vital if you want to understand those unfamiliar descriptions. The first stanza ends with a description of the mist enshrouding a valley, and the poet alludes to the primordial mists that covered the earth in creation, when there was no landform and there was just mist floating around. That's what the poet is alluding to there. And this introduces one of the major themes underpinning this poem, that of the transformation and the rebirth that is part of the cyclical process of nature. And if any of you have watched The Lion King, you'll understand from that song, the circle of life, how things born and die, and we go round and round. You look in your own life, you can see how the seasons come and go, one after the other in order. That's what we call the cyclical process of nature. Now this is further developed in the last lines of the poem, where the poet states that though the weather is bleak and harsh, under the ground, the seeds of summer are already preparing for their new lives. In the middle of stanza 2, the poet likens the scenery in purity and beauty to a bride adorned for her wedding. However, he is quick to point out that this is a fleeting, temporary transformation, and the bride, well, she will soon return to a raw country maid with the melting of the frost by the sun. Isn't that sad? The title, A Hard Frost, occurs when temperatures become very, very low. In other words, below -2 degrees Celsius. And anything exposed to the night air gets a coating of ice crystals. And this can be very beautiful, but it's also very, very damaging to plants. Let's have a look at the structure of the poem now. Now, this poem consists of 2 stanzas written in free verse and of 9 and 10 lines each respectively. The first stanza describes the scene, the beautiful scene and the ice and the icicles and the frost. And the second stanza gives a deeper meaning and a deeper insight into what you are actually seeing in the first stanza. Now, note the use of enjambment, where one sentence flows from one line onto the next without stopping. And this creates a smooth flow of the poem, as if the poet is thinking aloud, describing the magical theme and its deeper, more important meanings. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at some of the imagery metaphors that are used throughout this poem. And I'm going to read a couple of lines. The first 2 lines. A frost came in the night and stole my world, and left this changeling for it, a precocious image of spring, too brilliant to be true. Now here we can see it says that the frost has stolen the poet's world. In other words, what should be there is not, and it's something completely different. And this changeling, as he calls it, is quite interesting, because the word changeling means a creature that is deceiving and is pretending. And this is a metaphor of the frost that the poet creates. And you need to be distrustful of its beauty. It may look beautiful, but it's not the real thing. Have a look at a few other lines. But blossomers in crystal, stems of the mist, and the sun looks out, and the fields blaze with diamonds. Now the mist is a metaphor for the ephemeral, those dreams, those thoughts that are kind of there that you don't quite able to grasp, and they don't quite turn into reality, and yet they seem real. But extending this metaphor even further, the diamonds appear to be a metaphor for the materialistic nature of people. So although there is the metaphor of the dreams and the things that can't be reached, there's also the metaphor of the solidity of nature and how human beings look for the materialistic, the beauty, the diamonds, the richness. Now, there is an extended metaphor as well, which we need to look at. And the poet uses frost as an extended metaphor to compare the image of frost-formed ice crystals to represent the superficial in the world, which by appearance holds a lot of promise, but prove to have no value. All right, so that runs all the way through the poem. That sometimes the beauty, sometimes the loveliness that we see holds no value at all and is there for such a short time. Let's look at a simile. Blind tissue, whence creation formed. Now this is a comparison of the mist, which is impenetrably thick, which limits his sight. This is also indicative of the primitive matter from which nature is formed. All right? So now that mist is very important. So we had the frost, the diamonds, and the mist. All important aspects that come through this poem time and time again. Another image that we're going to be looking at, another aspect we need to consider in this poem, is the use of personification. Now, you know, personification is when we apply human characteristics to an inanimate or a non-human entity. Let's start with came in the night and stole my world. So frost is personified and made to seem like a thief that sneaks in at night and steals things. Right? Interesting. The sun looks out. So once again, there is a personification. Does the sun really look? No, it doesn't. But in this context, he's saying the sun looked out, and he's comparing it to a person who is looking out of a window and observing the world that lays beneath them. The terms mockery spring, bridal gear, raw country made. Now, this is a personification of the frost as one who creates a wonderful but deceptive image that does not deliver on its promise. And then we're going to look at the stiff clods, unclenches their grip on the seeds and lets out future breath. The personification of the soil as being a restrictive force broken by the frost is effective as it's the promise of new life. We need to learn to live with the COVID virus, you know, the new normal, at least for the next few months. And we have just what you need to make sure you never miss a single school lesson. And it's absolutely free. Mahala! High quality, powerful, animated lessons for all your subjects. So don't spend a cent until you have tried iWhiz. It's everything you need. All video lessons, textbooks, workbooks, exam prep. We want you to ace 2021.